Going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at, whenever you're watching this. Today we're gonna check out something new. One of my YouTube members has a new world story universe for us to check out. We're gonna be checking out Kaiserreich, which I guess is a mod for a game that has spawned a bunch of book stories and its own little universe. Not sure exactly what it's about. I think it has to do with some World War I stuff, but we're gonna check it out and see what it's all about here. So we're gonna check a video about here today by Kaiserreich Cinema. What is Kaiserreich? Mod and Universe Documentary, Part 1, Modding, Founding, etc. So that's what we're gonna take a look at here today. Links will be down below in the description to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to Kaiserreich Cinema's channel. So please do me a favor, click those links. If you enjoy this video as we go through it, go over and give it a like, and you know, check out Kaiserreich's content and see if you enjoy their content, and if you do, give them a sub. But yeah, so we're just gonna jump into this video here. I don't know why YouTube keeps putting my quality at the lowest possible instead of the highest possible, but that's YouTube for you. I did not tell you to start yet, video. But we're getting a cat tax right off the beginning here. There it is. There's the kitty tax. All right, so let's see what this is about.
It is I, subjects, the Kaiser Cat. It has come to my
great Kaiser Kitty
that over 70% of you have not subscribed. This simply will not do. Press that subscribe button and praise your Empress Cat.
You heard him.
Now,
hit that sub button.
Enjoy the video. What if Germany had won the Great War? Kaiserreich is a mod for a grand strategy war game called Hearts of Iron, a game that allows players to replay the events of World War II from the perspective of any nation. Kaiserreich as a project is notable for its long development cycle. The mod was founded...
So for me, because I'm old, this very much looks like, Risk. If you guys have played the old board game Risk, that's what this reminds me of. That or Axis and Allies, which is another kind of similar but a little bit more detailed game.
In 2005, and has seen releases across various games, with many ups and downs along the way. Today, the mod boasts over 600,000 downloads, and has many spin-offs, such as this crowdfunded YouTube channel, dedicated to turning the rich world of the game into comic books, short films, audio dramas, and even an animated series.
Oh, snap.
Kaiserreich is a complete alt history universe based on a single and simple premise. What if Germany had won World War I? My name is Vincent, founder of Kaiserreich Cinema and designer of the Kaiserreich logo. For this video,
I mean, if you think about it honestly, like historically, it would have a lot of implications, like obviously Hitler and the Nazi Party wouldn't have come to power, and so a lot of the terrible things that they did wouldn't have happened to a lot of different people, and they wouldn't have been persecuted, or maybe they would have, and it would have happened in a different way. Like, it's honestly, it's a huge... World War II is a major event, and if Germany had won World War I, obviously World War II either wouldn't have happened, or would have happened in a very different way. So it's an interesting idea to think about,
series, I collaborated with 3 generations of Kaiserreich mod developers to bring you the first chronicle of the history of the mod and project. Discover how technology and community have shaped this massive project, spanning across games and generations. Today, Kaiserreich Cinema invites you to follow along as we uncover the past, present, and future of Kaiserreich.
That's true. That is true. I mean, World War II really does, out of all of like the major wars, World War II in cinema and story really does, at least here in America, gets the attention. I don't know about other, countries. I would assume in other countries that have probably, I guess you could say, a longer, more richer history when it comes to wars and battles, because obviously Europe is centuries older than, America is. That might be different. But for us here in America, World War II was kind of our greatest and finest moment, I guess you could say. So it's the one that is storied and praised the most. So, I mean, yeah, World War II what if scenarios have definitely, at least over here, been done quite a bit in both gaming, movies, etc.
Decades of alt history. In order to understand Kaiserreich and the unique origins of its universe, we have to explore what terms like alternate history and point of divergence mean. Alternate history, often abbreviated as alt history, is a subgenre of historical fiction. The Collins English Dictionary describes alternate history as a genre of fiction in which the author speculates how a historical event may have played out differently.
Right, how it could have happened.
This
what if scenarios
historical event is what we call the point of divergence, or POD.
Oh, this is made before Hearts of Iron 4?
At which the timeline splits from our own history, and the story is the far-reaching butterfly effect of that, often seemingly small, change. In Kaiserreich, the point of divergence happens in January of 1917, when Germany decides to not resume unrestricted submarine warfare. As a result, the United States do not intervene in the First World War. This leads to the collapse of the Allied front.
That would be a big thing, yeah.
To a German victory in the war. Many of the states that would be wiped off the map by the Treaty of Versailles in our own timeline survive in Kaiserreich, and many fringe historical figures find their resurgence in this brave new world. The timeline of Kaiserreich presents the player with a vastly different reality in 1936. The victorious German Empire has managed to carve puppet states out of her territories won from Russia, and both Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire have survived the Great War, if only barely. France and Britain, however, have seen their colonial empires collapse after leftist revolutions at home. Rather than the communist ideology of our own time, Kaiserreich's timeline is...
I mean, yeah, just think about that too. You know, how it would have changed the rise of communism. China might not have, you know, turned to more of a communist view. North Korea and Korea might not have split. Like, it has potential massive implications on how vastly different the world really would be, you know.
Is defined by cynicalism, an offshoot of communist ideology that sprung up in the wake of Bolshevik defeat in the Russian Civil War. Kaiserreich opens with a famous
Russian Civil War, huh?
Between this new syndicalist Internationale, the German-aligned Reichspakt, and remnants of the governments in exile of the Entente. Hundreds of other storylines play out in the vast and rich world of Kaiserreich, but for the sake of this video, we will focus on the core scenario. For those wishing a deep dive into all aspects of the world of Kaiserreich, the Kaiserreich Wiki and documentary series are a great source to learn more. The story of the Kaiserreich mod, however, begins in 2002 with a niche strategy game by a small Swedish developer.
Interesting. So the mod starts in 2002 with a bunch of history being established from Germany winning World War I. That's pretty interesting. It's a pretty interesting idea of setting the game in what I guess maybe the game at the time would have been at the modern time, you know, whenever the mod was made, it might have been made for whatever game was out in 2002. So yeah, the interesting idea of a modern, you know, setting after, you know, with all the history built up from World War I with Germany winning the war.
Called Paradox Entertainment. In 1999, Swedish board game manufacturer Target Games filed for bankruptcy. Its video game wing, then the workplace of Paradox founder Johan Andersson, was spun off as a separate company called Paradox Entertainment.
Oh, that's how Paradox came about.
Become one of the first companies ever to dedicate large amounts of resources to the grand strategy map game. These games would follow in the board game traditions of war games such as Risk and Diplomacy, wherein players controlled a nation in history from the world map, making decisions and forging alliances against other countries.
You know, other than the Total War Warhammer series, my other absolute favorite Total War game was Total War Empire. It still today is probably, I don't know, it might not be, I would have to check my actual playtime because there's 3 incarnations of the Total War Warhammer games. But Empire might still be my most played. I played that game, I don't know how many hours I put into it, but I definitely beat the game with every faction in like every way possible. You know, prestige victories, domination victories, etc., etc. Just great game.
The passionate wargamers driving this community were called Grognerds.
Let's toss up to an Empire Medieval 2 for you.
Paradox developed many of the most well-known map games currently on the market, with several series spanning different ages of human history. One of these titles was Hearts of Iron, a World War II strategic simulator that allowed players to play out the events of the Second World War as historical or ahistorical as they wanted.
Interesting.
Hearts of Iron became popular in a niche community and was well known for being very easy to mod. Hearts of Iron's modding scene started with popular historical mods such as The Great War and A Stony Road.
I mean, yeah, you would think it's essentially kind of like, I mean, I guess it would obviously depend on how it's coded, but the idea is a simple idea. It's basically like a tabletop game that has been translated to, you know, an electronic gaming format here. So you wouldn't think it would be too terribly hard to mod, right?
As the game was a modest success, Paradox developed a sequel in 2004 called Hearts of Iron 2. Small user-generated content began springing up in the wake of the sequel's release. Hearts of Iron 2 brought many updates and user-friendly features to the hard-to-learn game, and the community grew leaps and bounds in the early 2000s. Back then, communities would meet on online message boards called forums. As the Paradox...
I don't know. The way he said this, it almost makes it sound like this is a relic of a bygone era. Like, you know, he's like trying to talk to the you know, like Gen Zs or whatever's like, back in the day we used to have this thing called forums that we used to go to, and that's how people used to communicate before we had the telephones. I don't know. This is the way he said it just made me laugh.
As forums grew, they became a gathering place for old history enthusiasts. A popular tradition in these early forum days was to write a thread detailing what had happened in your game. These after-action reports, often abbreviated to AARs, became a hybrid of old history stories and pen and paper role-playing set in the politics of the 1940s. Our story begins with a user on a message board called sock.history.whatif, now lost to the sands of time. This user is only known under the nickname Sarma.
Exactly, yeah, the deep lore.
And he wrote the first chapter to the Kaiserreich story.
All the rushes.
In 2005, a Paradox forum user called Sarmatia1871 was riding a train through Europe. A historical enthusiast and scholar, Sarmatia's travels inspired him to begin drafting a European history different from our own that would form the basis of Kaiserreich. Later that year, Sarmatia started work on a mod called All the Russias. In this Hearts of Iron 2 mod, Sarmatia envisaged a world where the Bolsheviks did not take over Russia after the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, but rather governance fell to the democratic President Kerensky. Sarmatia founded All the Russias primarily to reimagine a typical game of Hearts of Iron. In the vanilla game, the USSR was overpowering, dominating much of every playthrough. Carving up Russia would make for an interesting alternative, and the foundations of Russia's democratic, socialist, and autocratic paths were laid out early on. The mod was popular in the Hearts of Iron 2 modding community, and many players joined the project that would
yeah, that's pretty interesting. And I mean, yeah, it would have massive implications, right? Because Russia was at that time, and for quite a while, you know, still a huge powerhouse, and there was a lot of political things. I mean, just throughout Europe and Russia in general during this time period, there was all kinds of political uprisings and parties and things happening. So
we now know and love. Fans and contributors began further discussing and developing all the Russias on the Paradox message boards. This in turn inspired Sarmatia and a new generation of developers to draft up more and more ideas for inverting the normal power balance in Hearts of Iron. To change the core mechanics of the 1930s timeline, they imagined a world away from the black and white morality of a Nazi-occupied Europe and the victorious allies fighting them. Sarmatia drafted a world locked in a tenuous new world order, with Germany as an unstable and chafing hegemon, challenged by a socialist France and Britain. The notion of Germany winning World War I was
right, exactly.
The concept was explored by historian Neil Ferguson in the mid-90s. However, many of these stories revolved around a fascist France or a very stable European order based around Germany. Sarmatia wanted to go further and build a world that was eerily unfamiliar. A timeline where many historical figures from our own time met their demise early, leaving unknown ideologies to rise in their wake. All of these ideas sprung from the point of divergence of Germany winning the First World War. In a German-dominated history, the Great War would be referred to in German as the Weltkrieg. This is why the project was eventually titled Kaiserreich, Legacy of the Weltkrieg. In Kaiserreich, Legacy of the Weltkrieg, the principles of game design mix with story to create a universe that is rich with lore and imagination. Many of the tropes defining the 20th century are inverted in Kaiserreich. Great nations are made to collapse, and fringe nations and characters rise to prominence.
Right.
Using Hearts of Iron 2's event system, a player could respond to a political event with several pre-written options. These events would then lead to other choices and events. While this was playing out in your own nation, the AI would also receive events and make choices based on a probability written in by the developer of the country.
So, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, the only other kind of game to reference something like this that I can think of, but it took it in a far more... I mean, the first one was a little more serious, but then after it, the rest of the iterations kind of got more, like, comical, I guess you could say. But it would be Command & Conquer with the Red Alert, you know, series. The whole idea behind Red Alert initially was that Einstein, you know, through his various technologies and creating the chronosphere and yada yada that can distort time, goes back in time and eliminates Hitler, and in doing so Stalin and the Russians come to power and World War II happens, but it happens with the Allies and everyone against Russia, etc., etc. And so they have their whole other divergent history. And the first game was a little bit more kind of a serious tone, but then it got kind of more, you know, wacky comical after that with all kinds of crazy stuff. So, like, it's interesting how, again, you can, like, different, kind of the same idea, but done in different ways. This one has spawned this whole universe and story around World War I and Germany winning the war. And then, you know, the only other game that I can think of to compare it to, you know, the Red Alert franchise is about removing Hitler from the picture after World War I has happened. And thus the Russians, you know, Stalin comes to power, and how that history diverged. You know, it's just, it's interesting, the different ideas and the storylines that people can come up with. But this one seems to be done much more with a kind of real grounded history and how real grounded events would have taken place and how it would have had potential, real world impacts politically throughout Europe and throughout Russia. Whereas again, the Red Alert franchise went kind of more in a, I want to say almost kind of like a Saturday morning kind of cartoony, a way. They went more in like a campy, let's have fun with this scenario, where this is more of kind of a serious idea. I think a lot of creators were history students or just nerds who love the time period. Yeah.
This system, reminiscent of old text-based role-playing games, was used to great effect in Kaiserreich. These complex, interlocking scripts created vastly different outcomes each time a player started a new game of Kaiserreich. Syndicalist revolutions could spring up and alter the balance of power as nations flipped factions before the Second Weltkrieg even started. This unique tradition of long event chains continues to this day, and is one of the reasons why Kaiserreich.
It's interesting that the United States has a big, change going on here during this period.
Role-playing game as much as it is a grand strategy war game.
And Brazil is taking over South America.
At this point, here is a map showing a complex event and decision tree from Kaiserreich's China scenario. In the Kaiserreich timeline, the French and British colonial collapse has led to a vastly different scenario in China. This has greatly altered the power dynamics of the warlords ruling China at this time. In Kaiserreich, the German Empire supports an alliance of warlords in the south of China called the League of Eight Provinces. However, this warlord alliance is fragile and deeply corrupt, and an economic crisis will soon send the House of Cards tumbling down. As Germany loses her grip over southern China, Republican and nationalist forces step in to fill the power vacuum. Playing as Germany, a player may attempt to keep their puppet state and interests upright at the cost of a risky military intervention, or attempt to navigate the complex dynamics of China through a long event.
So it's interesting too, like they've even gone to the point of developing like a European campaign, kind of a Russian oriented campaign, and now a Chinese and kind of Asian Pacific oriented campaign, and how all of these, I guess, kind of interact and would affect each other.
And decision tree. These effects in turn alter the possible paths of all other nations and powers in China, completely altering the dynamic of the game.
So I mean, like, yeah, you see, I assume, this is Japan. Japan's over here taking over Korea and moving up towards Russia. I assume the gray is Germany taking over China. This is India. I don't know. I would assume this might be some kind of Middle Eastern country that's still in control over here. Maybe Turkey or something like that,
In the world of Kaiserreich, this level of complex simulation does not stop at the major powers of the time. Here is a similar tree of events for Ethiopia, a minor nation in the Horn.
That's actually interesting too, like a small country like Ethiopia coming to power and, potentially having a massive global influence.
Of Africa with only a limited industrial or military base. At the time of writing, Kaiserreich for Hearts of Iron 4 has events and focus trees for about 90% of the nations in the world.
Wow, just think about that. I want to listen to that again real quick.
At the time of writing, Kaiserreich for Hearts of Iron 4 has events and focus trees for about 90% of the nations in the world.
90% of the nations in the world are... So that I would assume that means more than 90 nations / factions are in this game, but at least 90 of them have their own unique events and, trees for you to play with. That alone is pretty crazy. That alone is pretty insane to have that much detail and work essentially put into a mod. This is one of the things that I've talked about and said for a long time with games, that a lot of gaming companies either don't understand nowadays or they just don't care, is the fact that if they allow the community to mod and if they work with their community with mods, their games could last forever. Like, you look at Skyrim. The only reason why Skyrim is even a thing still today is because of the modding community. TF2 is still played today because of the communities that have formed around it and the various mods and things that are there in those games. Counter-Strike wouldn't be as big of a game today if it wasn't for a lot of the mods and things that people made for Counter-Strike in the old days of 1.6 and Source. Now, of course, that esports has become a thing. That has really kind of become the main focus of it. But back in the day with surf maps and, you know, the Warcraft 3 mod and all other kinds of different gameplay mods for Counter-Strike, that's one of the things that really kept Counter-Strike alive. And so, like, it just shows that games like this, you know, with a healthy modding community, they can last for years and years and years and years. And it's just, I don't know, it's just something that I really wish a lot of these, you know, AAA dev companies would understand and would work more with people to allow them to mod their games. I mean, you look at, again, the Battle Royale genre came out of modding, from Arma 3 to then H1Z1 to then PUBG, and then blew up from there. You know, PUBG opened the doors to Fortnite and Apex and Call of Duty Warzone and, you know, all other kinds of Battle Royale games that are out there. So, I mean, I don't know. It's just modding and the community at whole, when, you know, enough people really love a game and they really want to invest time and effort into their own ideas of things into a game, that's when, you know, your game goes up to that next level of becoming something legendary. And I just wish a lot of these game dev companies would understand it. The problem is there's no way for them to really profit off of it, right? And that's the thing they're trying to do, especially Bethesda, with them trying to have their own, like, in-game store where they can charge for mods and whatnot so they can profit off of it. So I don't know, but it's just cool to see, like, a game like this with so many different people putting so much time and effort into creating this essential universe.
In Kaiserreich, the earliest developers crafted a world where syndicalism became the main left-wing ideology. Germany would be a leading power, and the US collapsed into civil war and anarchy. Building on the heritage of all the Russias, the power of countries is tied much closer in Kaiserreich, as powerhouses like the British Empire, the US and USSR are carved up by their troubles. Kaiserreich was in many ways a clever reversal of the entirety of Hearts of Iron II. Rather than a railroaded path to an Axis versus Allies World War II, Kaiserreich offered a bumpy road to an unknown destination, every game turning out differently.
See, and that's the thing also that makes games like this replayable, is that literally it plays out differently every time. That's one of the things, even with, like, Total War Empire, and even some of the other Total War games. A lot of times, depending on what faction you play, you know what other faction, like, if you've played the game enough, you know what other factions are going to end up being, like, the major countries that you're going to have to fight against, just because of their starting positions and, you know, all the resources they have available to them. They just always gain that extra bit of power, and they always become the factions that you end up having to fight against, and et cetera, et cetera. So the idea that every time you replay this, it's going to play out completely differently with a wholly different political scene and different countries coming to power and whatnot, just makes it even that much more interesting and obviously replayable.
This time, the principle of no canon past 36 rose to become a pillar of Kaiserreich tradition.
And that right there is a pretty interesting point too, that there's no canon in the story past, I guess what he said, 1936. So it almost kind of feels in a way like the SCP universe, in that there is almost kind of like a base canon, that there is an SCP Foundation and their purpose is to contain anomalies. That's like the base canon. aside from that, it kind of branches out into whatever your own various headcanon is. And I like stuff like that.
Kaiserreich lore does not dictate who wins in the Second World War. Your game and your story are as much true as anyone else's. In 2006, Kaiserreich released an alpha build on the Paradox forums. Sarmatia stepped up to lead the project and was supported by many historical enthusiasts and fans. He was joined by a designer and vexillographer known as T. Hideman, who designed the original Gear and Torch emblem as well as many flags in the Kaiserreich world. However, not long after Kaiserreich transitioned into beta, Sarmatia would take his leave from the project. With a PhD and real life taking a toll, Sarmatia 1871 retired from the project, never to return. While development continued after Sarmatia left the project, the next 4 years would see a steady decline in progress on Kaiserreich. As players moved on to new games and interests, the initial spark that had kindled the universe was dying out. Before the advent of modern programming management software, all code had to be managed manually. This was a thankless and labor-intensive task that involved a lot of file checking and created a whole suite of issues. As the Kaiserreich team slowly burned out, Paradox released Hearts of Iron III to a tepid audience. The title turned out to be a much more hardcore approach to strategic simulation. This was loved by hardcore fans of the genre, but the title was overlooked by the larger audience. Notoriously, Hearts of Iron III was also the most unmoddable Paradox title ever released, with much of the game's features locked away. A Kaiserreich project for Hearts of Iron III was attempted, but never saw a public release. As the 2010s approached, the Kaiserreich forums slowly died out due to a lack of interest and development. It would have been the end of Kaiserreich, were it not for a revival from an unexpected source.
The Savior!
In 2011, 2 years after the release of Hearts of Iron III, a spin-off sequel was released, of Hearts of Iron 2. Many in the community preferred Hearts of Iron 2 to Hearts of Iron 3's complexity, and Paradox sponsored a team of passionate modders to develop their own Hearts of Iron 2 revival projects. In the next few years, 2 Hearts of Iron 2 community remasters were released, Arsenal of Democracy and Darkest Hour. One of the developers for Darkest Hour was also a developer for Kaiserreich, so the moment the project went public, the Kaiserreich development team was one of the first to be contacted. The few remaining Kaiserreich developers were reinvigorated by the promise of a greatly enhanced game on the horizon, and Kaiserreich developers joined forces to create a port of Kaiserreich for Darkest Hour. Thanks in part to this early notice, Kaiserreich for Darkest Hour was released the same day as the game itself. Darkest Hour became an acclaimed success and an improvement on the base Hearts of Iron 2 formula in every way. The Darkest Hour developers, passionate Hearts of Iron 2 players and modders themselves, had set out to fix many of the game's inconsistencies and issues, while adding much requested features. After the mixed release of Hearts of Iron 3, Darkest Hour revived the modding community as many mods ported over to the new remaster. Along with this revival came the migration to a new forum, this time hosted by a friend of the team, solidifying the return of Kaiserreich to the modding scene in 2011. Kaiserreich would continue her steady march forward for the next 5 years, slowly developing its world and universe. In 2016, the light dawned on a completely new and extremely successful Hearts of Iron
4.
When Paradox announced Hearts of Iron 4, Kaiserreich fans around the world knew that it was once again time for another Kaiserreich.
It's time!
Gathering on new programming and community platforms, a new generation of modders closed ranks and began working on the most expansive version of the universe yet. In 2017, hundreds of thousands of players were about to discover Kaiserreich for Hearts of Iron 4. But what happened to Sarmatia? The original creator of the mod, since his departure in 2006, has never returned to Kaiserreich.
Damn.
In fact, nobody has talked to Sarmatia in over a decade. For this reason, I decided to seek him out and ask him more about his inspirations and the unique origins of the universe. I am then proud to present the first interview with Sarmatia in over a decade in part 2 of this documentary series.
Okay.
Until then, this is Vincent signing off, and I will see you for the next part, cats.
Awesome.
Kaiserreich Cinema needs you. Back the attack. Share our content or dash over to our alt history webshop.
All right, well, there we go. An interesting start to a documentary series about a mod that has obviously a lot of passion and story and history behind it, and honestly one that I hadn't ever really heard about. I've heard of Hearts of Iron, but it was never a franchise that I had ever gotten into. Honestly, kind of surprising because I love strategy and board games like that. I played Risk growing up with my dad and friends when I was a kid, both the tabletop game and the various old versions of the computer game. But it's just interesting to see how impassioned it is, and just the ideas behind the lore and the story, and the fact of how replayable really the mod is, and how all the different scenarios can really play out. It's like you said, it's not like something that is railroaded to one real story of these events happened that led to World War II, because that really seems to be kind of the idea of this, is the World War I era and what led up to everything happening in World War II. For the most part, from what he's talking about, sounds like what the focus of this is on. And so, I mean, yeah, just the idea of the differences throughout Europe and the various countries, the differences in Russia and China, all of those different regions. He didn't really talk about the States as much because, the States were much more, I guess, politically stable, you could say, during those time periods. I mean, we were the United States at the time. We were still doing our own thing, but Europe was really the kind of political hotbed that was going on, and obviously that's what led to the World War I and then World War II at those times. So but it's just interesting to see how it's all played out, and I'm curious to see more of the I guess if there is an established kind of canon and story in this universe, I'd be interested to learn more about it in general. Or I guess if it's kind of similar to the SCP in certain ways, where like there are different established storylines and canon lines and how they diverge, because again, obviously this is a what if scenario, and a single what if scenario can honestly spawn multiple what if scenarios, especially when you're talking about historical events. I mean, like they said, events in Germany can change events in France, change events in Britain, change events in China, change events in Russia, yada yada yada, because the Bolsheviks had gotten into power, and versus not getting into power, and there's all kinds of lines of things you can go down. So, but I'm interested to continue this documentary series, I guess, and see where he's going to go with this interview from one of the guys who was the original creator, and learn more about this. So there we go. So yeah, that was Kaiserreich Mod Universe Documentary Part 1 by Kaiserreich Cinema. Like I said, links will be down below in the description to the original video without my commentary and reaction. So if you enjoyed this, go over there, give it a like, and check out his channel. And if you enjoy the rest of his content, give the man a sub. Yeah, if you'd like to join us when we do these reactions live, there is a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. If you've been around the channel for a while, take a look at those and see if you decide you want to take your sport to the next level. But that's going to do it for here, guys. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and a sub. It helps me in the channel grow. We'll see you guys in the next one.